Isaac thought it was just another ride. But the woman in the back seat, she knew his name. The GPS glitched, the clock froze, and now he's driving a road that loops forever, haunted by a girl he left to die, and hunted by his own doppelganger. There's no way out, only the truth, and it's waiting at 3:08. The night was heavy, the kind that presses against your chest, making every breath feel borrowed. Isaac gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale under the faint glow of the dashboard. He was used to the quiet of these small-town roads, the endless stretches of asphalt connecting nowhere to nowhere. Driving for the app was his lifeline, a way to keep moving, to outrun the thoughts that crept in when he stayed still too long. But tonight, something felt off. The air was too thick, the stars too dim, like the world was holding its breath. It was just past 2 a.m. when the app pinged, a last-minute ride, the kind most drivers would skip. The pickup was a lone figure on a desolate shoulder, miles from any town. No houses, no gas stations, just a ribbon of road slicing through the dark. Isaac hesitated, his thumb hovering over the decline button. But the extra cash called, and he wasn't one to turn down a fare. He accepted, and the GPS blinked to life, guiding him toward the marker. When he pulled up, she was already there, standing motionless under the weak beam of a flickering streetlight. No luggage, no phone, just a woman in a plain gray coat, her face half hidden by a curtain of dark hair. In her hand, a crumpled piece of paper fluttered in the breeze. Isaac leaned over, rolling down the passenger window. "You the one who called for the ride?" he asked, his voice louder than he meant, cutting through the silence. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her boots crunching on the gravel. When she bent down to look at him, her eyes caught the light, sharp, unblinking, like they saw too much. She held up the paper, and Isaac's stomach twisted. Scrawled in uneven letters was his name, just his name. No address, no phone number. He forced a laugh, the kind that hides unease. "That's me. Guess you're my passenger. Where we headed?" She slid into the back seat without a word, the door clicking shut with a finality that made his skin prickle. "Siga diretto," she said, her voice low, steady, like she was reading from a script. "I'll tell you when to turn." Isaac glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but her face was turned toward the window, lost in the dark. "All right," he muttered, easing the car back onto the road. The engine hummed, and the night swallowed them whole. The first hour passed in silence. The road stretched on, straight as a blade, no curves, no intersections, just blacktop and the occasional flicker of a passing mile marker. Isaac tried to make small talk, the way he always did with quiet passengers. "Long night, huh? You from around here?" Nothing, not a nod, not a glance, just her silhouette, rigid, staring out at the endless dark. He checked the GPS. Still no destination, just a blinking dot moving forward. Weird, but not unheard of. Sometimes the app glitched. He'd driven routes like this before, long hauls through empty country. But something about this one gnawed at him. The clock on the dashboard read 3:08 a.m. He frowned, tapping the screen. It didn't change. He drove on, the hum of the tires filling the silence. Another hour crept by, or maybe it was less. Time felt slippery, like it was pooling around him. The clock still read 3:08. He blinked hard, shaking his head. Maybe he was tired, seeing things. He stole another glance at the rearview mirror, and his heart stuttered. The back seat was empty. No coat, no shadow, no woman. Just the worn upholstery staring back at him. His foot eased off the gas, the car slowing as he twisted in his seat. "Hey, you still?" The words died in his throat. She was there, right there, in the corner of his vision, sitting as still as ever. But when he looked directly, she vanished. His pulse hammered in his ears. "What the hell?" he whispered, gripping the wheel tighter. The mirror showed nothing. The seat was empty, but he could feel her, a weight in the air, a presence that pressed against his spine. He slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a stop. Gravel sprayed, and the silence rushed in, louder than the engine had been. He fumbled with the door, stumbling out into the cold. The road was deserted, the streetlight flickering like a dying pulse. He spun around, half expecting to see her, standing behind him, but there was nothing. Just the car idling in the dark and the endless stretch of asphalt. Then he saw it. A speck of light in the distance, growing brighter. Another car. He squinted, shielding his eyes as it approached. It was moving fast, too fast for this empty road. As it drew closer, his breath caught. It was his car. Same make, same model, same faded sticker on the windshield. And behind the wheel, a man man wearing his shirt, his face. A second Isaac. He staggered back, his mind reeling. The other car slowed, then stopped, its headlights pinning him in place. The driver, his double, stared at him, unblinking, before the car rolled forward again, disappearing into the night. Isaac stood frozen, his breath clouding in the air. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. He was tired, stressed, imagining things. He had to be. He climbed back into the car, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. The clock still read 3:08. The woman was gone, but her presence lingered, a whisper in the back of his mind. He pressed the gas, desperate to move, to escape. Whatever this was, the road unspooled ahead, but now he noticed the details. The streetlights. They were identical, repeating every few hundred yards. The same rusted pole, the same flickering bulb. The trees lining the road were carbon copies, their branches curling in the exact same patterns. It was like driving through a loop, a scene stuck on repeat. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd taken a wrong turn, gotten lost in some backroad maze. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't a road. It was something else, something that knew him, something that reflected him. His mistakes, his regrets, the things he'd buried so deep he thought they'd never find him. The woman's voice echoed in his head, "Siga diretto." Keep going, but to where? He'd been driving for hours, maybe days, and nothing changed. No towns, no signs, no other cars except that doppelganger, that ghost of himself. His throat tightened as memories began to surface, unbidden things he'd sworn to forget, a name, a face. A choice he'd made years ago, one that left blood on his hands, figuratively or not. He shook his head, trying to push it down, but the road wouldn't let him. It was pulling him apart, mile by mile, forcing him to see. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, and this time he saw her. Not in the back seat, but standing in the road behind him, her gray coat billowing in a wind that didn't exist. He slammed on the brakes, but when he looked again, she was gone. The car shuddered, the engine sputtering like it was fighting to stay alive. He floored the gas, the tires screaming, but the scenery didn't change. The same trees, the same lights, the same endless blacktop. Then the radio crackled to life, static at first, then a voice. His voice. "You can't outrun it," it said, low and deliberate. "You know what you did." Isaac's blood ran cold. He yanked the knob, shutting it off, but the words lingered, sinking into him like poison. He wanted to scream, to smash the dashboard, to do anything to break this nightmare, but the road didn't care. It kept pulling him forward, deeper into itself, deeper into him. Another car appeared in the distance, the same as before. His car, his face. This time, it didn't pass. It matched his speed, trailing just behind, its headlights boring into his rearview mirror. He pressed harder on the gas, but it stayed with him, a shadow he couldn't shake. His heart pounded as he realized what this was. Not a chase, not a race, a mirror. The road was showing him himself, every flaw, every failure, every secret he'd locked away. He thought of the woman again, the paper with his name. She wasn't a stranger. She was a memory, a piece of his past he'd tried to erase. But you can't erase something like that. It festers, it follows. And now it was here, riding with him, woven into the very road beneath his tires. Every mile was a reckoning, every turn a lie. He could keep driving, keep running, but the road would never end. Not until he faced it. Not until he remembered. The dashboard clock blinked, still frozen at 3:08. The trees repeated, the streetlights flickered, and the other car stayed close, a reminder that he couldn't escape. Not from this, not from himself. The woman's voice whispered again, soft but relentless, "Siga diretto." And so he did, because what else could he do? The road stretched on, and Isaac drove deeper into the night, deeper into the truth he'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun. Hours blurred into moments, or maybe it was the other way around. The air grew colder, the dark thicker, like the world was closing in. He saw her again, not in the mirror but in the road ahead, standing motionless as the car barreled toward her. He swerved, tires screeching, but she didn't move. She didn't have to. She was everywhere now, in every shadow, every flicker of light, and the other car was still there, always there, its driver watching him with his own eyes. Isaac's hands trembled on the wheel. He could feel it now, the weight of what he'd done. It wasn't just a memory, it was a wound, one he'd left to rot. The road knew, the woman knew, and the man in the other car, the one with his face, He knew too. They were all waiting for him to admit it, to say it out loud, but he couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The radio crackled again, his voice cutting through the static. "You can't keep driving forever," it said. "Sooner or later, you have to stop." Isaac's jaw clenched. He wanted to stop, to get out, to run until his lungs gave out. But where would he go? The road was all there was now, a loop of his own making, a prison built from his choices. And the woman, the memory, the truth, she was the key. But to unlock it, he'd have to face her, face himself. Another streetlight flickered, identical to the last. Another tree loomed, a twin of the one before. The clock held steady at 3:08. And the other car stayed close, its headlights a constant accusation. Isaac drove on, the road unyielding, the night endless. He could feel her in the car again, her presence heavier now, like a hand on his shoulder. "Siga diretto," she whispered. And he obeyed, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was remembering. The road stretched on, and so did the story. A cycle without end, a journey into the dark heart of a man who could never outrun himself. And as the miles piled up, the questions grew louder. What had he done? Who was she? And what would happen when he finally stopped driving? The road didn't care about Isaac's fear. It didn't slow, didn't bend, didn't offer a single exit to pull him from the nightmare. The dashboard clock was a frozen taunt, stuck at 3:08, as if time itself had given up on him. His hands were slick with sweat, slipping on the steering wheel. But he kept driving because stopping felt like surrendering to whatever this was. The woman's voice still echoed in his mind. "Siga diretto," and it was less a command now, more a tether, pulling him deeper into the endless blacktop that seemed to know him better than he knew himself. The other car was still there, trailing him like a predator pacing its prey. Its headlights burned into his rearview mirror, and every glance showed the same thing. His own face staring back, unblinking, from behind the wheel of that doppelganger vehicle. It wasn't just a copy. It was him. Every line of his jaw, every shadow under his eyes, every flicker of guilt he'd spent years burying. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but the world was closing in, the edges of his vision blurring like a dream he couldn't shake. The streetlights kept their eerie rhythm, flickering in perfect sync, each one a twin of the last. The trees, too, repeated their twisted shapes, their branches clawing at the sky in patterns he could swear he'd memorized by now. It wasn't a road anymore. It was a trap, a loop woven from his own mind, and every mile dragged him closer to something he wasn't ready to face. His chest tightened, his breath shallow, as fragments of memory began to claw their way up. A name he hadn't spoken in years, a moment he'd locked away, promising himself it would stay buried. But the road didn't care about promises. He blinked on the radio, desperate for noise, for anything to drown out the silence and the whispers of his own thoughts. Static hissed, then cleared, and there was his voice again, low and deliberate, like it was sitting right beside him. "You can't outrun it, Isaac. You know what you did." His stomach lurched. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, shutting it off. But the words hung in the air, heavy as truth. What he did, what he'd done. The road knew, and it wasn't letting him forget. He glanced at the passenger seat, half expecting to see her there, the woman with the gray coat, the one who'd started this. But it was empty, just like the back seat, just like the mirror. Yet he could feel her, a weight in the car, a shadow that moved when he didn't. "Who are you?" he muttered, his voice cracking. No answer, just the hum of the engine and the relentless thrum of tires on asphalt. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but deep down he knew she wasn't a stranger. She was a piece of him, a shard of something he'd broken long ago. The other car edged closer now, its headlights flooding his cabin with cold white light. He pressed the gas, the speedometer climbing, but it didn't matter. The doppelganger kept pace, effortless, like it was part of him. He swerved, testing it, and the other car mirrored him perfectly, a shadow he couldn't shake. His pulse pounded in his temples, his thoughts spiraling. Was this real? Was he losing it? Or was the road something else entirely? A place where his sins came to life? A flicker of movement caught his eye. There, in the road ahead, she stood again, the woman motionless, her coat flapping in a wind he couldn't feel. Her face was hidden, but he knew those eyes, that stare that cut through him. He yanked the wheel, tires squealing, but the car didn't respond the way it should. It lurched, sluggish, like it was fighting him. He glanced back and she was gone, but the other car was closer now, so close he could see the glint of his own watch on the driver's wrist. "Stop it!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the night. He didn't know who he was yelling at. The woman, the other him, the road itself. His foot slammed on the brake, the car skidding, gravel spraying like gunfire. He sat there, chest heaving, the engine idling. The other car stopped too, just behind him, its headlights pinning him in place. He couldn't see the driver now, but he felt those eyes, his eyes boring into him. He fumbled for the door, stumbling out into the cold. The air was wrong, too still, too heavy, like it was holding him in place. He spun around, searching for her, for anything, but there was just the road stretching into the dark and the two cars, his and the other. He took a step toward it, his breath clouding in the chill, and that's when he saw it, the license plate. It was his, not just the same numbers, the same scratches, the same dent from a fender bender 3 years ago. It was his car, his knees buckled, and he caught himself against the hood. This wasn't possible. He was here, he was real, he was... A sound broke the silence, a low creak, like a door opening. He whipped around, and there she was, standing not 10 feet away, the crumpled paper still in her hand. His name, written in that jagged scrawl, seemed to glow in the dark. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her presence was an answer, a challenge. "Remember." He backed away, his heart hammering, and climbed back into the car. The other car was still there, waiting. He didn't want to drive, didn't want to keep going, but the road didn't give him a choice. He pressed the gas, and the world blurred. Back into motion, the same trees, the same lights, the same endless loop. The woman's voice came again, softer now, almost sad. "Siga diretto." Keep going. But to where? To what? The memories were stronger now, pushing against the walls he'd built. A night, years ago, when he'd made a choice that left someone behind, someone who trusted him. He shook his head, trying to force it down, but the road wouldn't let him. It was in the air, in the shadows, in the flicker of every streetlight. He saw her face, not the woman in the coat, but the one from before, the one he'd failed. Her eyes, her voice, her fear. He'd told himself it wasn't his fault, that he'd had no choice, but the road disagreed. The other car was right behind him now, so close he could hear its engine, a low growl that matched his own. He glanced in the mirror, and there he was, himself, but different, harder, colder, the version of him that knew the truth, that carried it without flinching. "You can't keep this up," the radio crackled, his voice again, sharp and unforgiving. "You're only running from yourself." Isaac's hands tightened on the wheel. He wanted to argue, to scream that he wasn't running, that he was fine, that he'd moved on. But the lie tasted bitter, and the road knew better. It always had. The woman appeared again, this time in the passenger seat, her head turned toward him. He didn't look, couldn't look, but he felt her stare, heavy with expectation. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, his voice breaking. The car swerved, the tires humming, but she didn't answer. She never did. The loop tightened, the repetitions faster now. Streetlights blinked in a staccato rhythm. Trees blurred into a single shape, and the other car was no longer behind him. It was beside him, matching his every move. He could see himself clearly now, the other Isaac, driving with a calm he didn't feel. That version of him wasn't afraid, wasn't running. That version knew something he didn't, or maybe something he refused to know. The road was changing too. The asphalt seemed softer, almost liquid, rippling under the tires. The sky was lower, pressing down, and the air was thick with the scent of something sharp, like regret. He saw her again, standing in the road, then sitting in the back, then walking along the shoulder, her coat trailing behind her. She was everywhere and nowhere, a reminder that he couldn't escape. Not her, not himself, not the truth. The radio crackled once more, his voice softer this time, almost pleading. "You have to face it, Isaac. You have to stop." But stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant reliving it. The moment, the choice, the weight of what he'd done. He wasn't ready, he might never be. So he drove, the road stretching on, the other car keeping pace, the woman's presence a constant pull. The clock held at 3:08. The streetlights flickered, and the trees whispered his secrets back to him. What had he done? Who was she? And how much longer could he keep driving before the road forced him to answer? The night swallowed his questions, and the loop tightened, pulling him deeper into the dark, where the only way out was through the truth he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. The road stretched on, an unrelenting ribbon of black that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it were breathing, watching, waiting for Isaac to crack. The dashboard clock mocked him, still frozen at 3:08, a silent accusation that time wasn't his ally anymore. His hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his fingers trembling with a mix of fear and exhaustion. The engine's low hum was the only constant, a heartbeat in the dark. But even that felt wrong, like it was sinking with something deeper, something inside him. He didn't want to keep driving, didn't want to follow the woman's ghostly command, siga diretto. But the road didn't offer choices. It demanded obedience, and Isaac, for all his panic, was too afraid to defy it. The other car was still there, a relentless shadow glued to his tail, its headlights carving through the night like twin blades. Every glance in the rearview mirror showed the same thing, his own face, his own eyes, staring back from the driver's seat of that impossible duplicate. But it wasn't just a copy. The other Isaac seemed sharper, more certain, like a version of himself that had never doubted, never faltered, never made the mistakes that haunted him. It was infuriating, terrifying to see himself so close, yet so alien, a reminder of everything he wasn't. He pressed the gas harder, the speedometer needle twitching, but the other car matched him effortlessly, never falling behind, never pulling ahead. It was part of him, he realized, a piece of his own mind given form, and that thought made his stomach churn. The streetlights continued their hypnotic flicker, each one a carbon copy of the last, their weak glow casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. The trees, too, were locked in their endless repetition, their gnarled branches curling in patterns that felt too deliberate, too familiar. He'd seen these shapes before, not just tonight, but in dreams, in moments when his guard was down and his memories slipped free. The road wasn't just a place. It was a mirror reflecting his thoughts, his fears, his secrets. Every mile peeled back another layer, exposing the things he'd buried, the things he'd sworn no one would ever know. And the woman, that silent passenger with the crumpled paper, was the key to it all, a ghost from his past who refused to stay dead. He tried to focus, to anchor himself in the present, but the road wouldn't let him. The air was thick, heavy, with a metallic tang that clung to his throat. The sky seemed lower now, a suffocating canopy of black that pressed against the car, making the world feel smaller, tighter, like a trap snapping shut. He rolled down the window, desperate for fresh air, but the cold that rushed in was wrong, sharp, biting, carrying whispers he couldn't quite hear. He slammed the window shut, his breath ragged, and that's when he saw her again. Not in the mirror, not in the road, but in the passenger seat. Her grey coat folded neatly over her lap, her head turned toward him. Her face was still hidden, shadowed by her hair, but her presence was a weight, a pressure that made his chest ache. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine. He didn't expect an answer. She never answered, but the question spilled out. Anyway, a plea to the void. Her head tilted slightly, and for a moment, he thought he saw her eyes, bright and piercing, cutting through him like glass. Then she was gone, the seat empty, but the air was heavier now, thick with the scent of something sharp, like blood or regret. He shook his head, trying to clear it, but the memories were stronger now, clawing their way up from the dark corners of his mind. A night, years ago, when he'd made a choice that changed everything, a choice that left someone behind, someone who'd trusted him, someone who'd paid for his mistakes. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, the pain grounding him for a moment. "I didn't mean it," he muttered, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. The woman, the other Isaac, himself? The road didn't care. It kept pulling him forward, deeper into its loop, deeper into the truth he'd spent a lifetime running from. The radio crackled to life again, unprompted, his own voice cutting through the static. "You can't keep lying, Isaac. Not here. Not to me." The words were calm, almost gentle, but they hit like a punch. He yanked the knob, silencing it, but the echo lingered, sinking into him like a blade. He wasn't lying. He wasn't. He'd moved on, hadn't he? He'd built a life, a routine, a way to keep the past at bay. But the road disagreed, and it had a way of making its point. The other car was closer now, so close he could hear its tires humming, a low, predatory growl that matched his own engine. He glanced in the mirror, and there he was, the other Isaac, driving with a steady hand, his face unreadable but his eyes locked on him. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was a challenge, a demand. Face it, those eyes said. Face what you did. Isaac's throat tightened, his pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't want to face it. He couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the road wasn't giving him a choice. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and there she was again, standing in the road ahead, her coat billowing in a wind that didn't exist. He swerved, the car fishtailing, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. She was a statue, a sentinel, her presence a reminder that he couldn't escape. He straightened the wheel, his heart hammering, and glanced back. She was gone, but the other car was still there, its headlights flooding his cabin with cold, unyielding light. He pressed the gas, the speedometer climbing, but it didn't matter. The road was a loop, a prison, and every mile brought him closer to the truth he'd buried. The asphalt seemed to shift under the tires, rippling like water, and the trees blurred into a single, endless shape, their branches twisting into patterns that looked like faces, like hands, like accusations. The streetlights pulsed faster now, their flicker almost strobe-like, disorienting him, making the world feel like it was unraveling. He saw her again, not just in the road, but everywhere. In the shadows, in the reflections, in the corners of his vision. She was no longer just a passenger, no longer just a memory. She was the road, the night, the weight that had been pressing on him since the moment he'd accepted her ride. The radio crackled again, his voice sharper this time, cutting through the haze. "You're running out of time, Isaac. You can't keep driving forever." He wanted to scream, to tell it to shut up, to leave him alone, but the words wouldn't come. His throat was dry, his hands shaking, his mind a storm of fear and guilt. He saw her face again, not the woman in the coat, but the one from before, the one he'd failed. Her eyes wide with trust, then fear, then nothing. He'd told himself it wasn't his fault, that he'd had no choice, but the road knew better. It always had. The other car pulled alongside him now, matching his speed, its driver staring at him with a calm that made his skin crawl. It was him, but not him, harder, colder, the Isaac who carried the truth without flinching. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice hoarse, but the other Isaac didn't answer, didn't blink. He just drove, a silent judge, a mirror to the man Isaac couldn't bear to be. The road shimmered, the lines blurring, and for a moment he thought he saw something in the distance. A town, a light, a way out. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the dark. The woman was back in the car now, sitting in the back seat, her hands folded over the crumpled paper. He didn't look at her, couldn't look at her, but he felt her stare heavy with expectation. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. She didn't answer, but the air grew colder, the scent of regret stronger, and he knew she was waiting for him to remember, to admit it, to face the thing he'd done, but he wasn't ready. He might never be. The road tightened its grip, the loop faster now, the repetitions relentless. Streetlights blinked in a frantic rhythm, trees melted into a single twisted shape, and the other car stayed beside him, its presence a constant accusation. The sky was gone, replaced by a void that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. The woman's voice came again, soft but unyielding. "Siga diretto, keep going." And so he did, because stopping meant facing it, and facing it meant reliving it, the moment, the choice, the weight of what he'd done. The memories were a flood now, crashing over him, pulling him under. A night, years ago, when he'd made a decision that broke everything. A name he hadn't spoken since, a face he'd tried to forget. The road was forcing him to see it, to feel it, to carry it again. He saw her eyes, her fear, her trust, and then the moment it all shattered, he told himself he'd had no choice, that it was survival, that he'd done what anyone would do. But the road disagreed, and it had a way of making its point. The other car was ahead of him now, leading the way, its taillights glowing like eyes in the dark. He followed, not because he wanted to, but because the road left him no choice. The woman was everywhere, sitting beside him, standing in the road, walking along the shoulder, her coat trailing behind her like a shroud. The radio crackled, his voice a whisper now, almost tender. "You can't outrun it, Isaac, you never could." He wanted to argue, to fight, to prove it wrong, but the weight was too much, the truth too heavy. The road stretched on, the loop tightening, the night endless. The streetlights flickered, the trees whispered, and the other car led him deeper into the dark, deeper into himself. What had he done? Who was she? And how much longer could he keep driving before the road forced him to answer the questions? Burned unanswered as the miles piled up, each one a step closer to the truth he'd spent a lifetime avoiding, each one a reminder that the thing he feared most wasn't the road, wasn't the woman, wasn't even the other Isaac. It was him, always him. And the road would keep him driving until he faced it, mile after endless mile, into the night that never ended. The road vibrated under Isaac's tires, a living thing that pulsed with his unraveling nerves. The dashboard clock sneered, stuck. At 3:08, like time had ditched him in this endless loop. His hands, drenched in sweat, gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles glowed white in the faint dashboard light. He wanted to smash the brakes, scream into the dark, anything but keep driving. But her voice, "Keep going," was a blade in his skull, dragging him along the blacktop that knew his sins better than he did. The other car, his car, driven by that shadow him, led the way, its taillights flaring red, pulling him deeper into a night that wouldn't break. Hold up, let's hit pause on this nightmare road for a second. That crumpled paper with Isaac's name. Man, it's chilling, right? It's like the past catching up, refusing to stay buried. Ever had a moment where something from your life just wouldn't let go, like a memory or a choice that keeps haunting? You drop it in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, and I bet others do too. If this eerie ride's got you hooked, smash that like button to keep the vibes going, and hit subscribe for more creepy tales that'll keep you up at night. All right, let's get back to Isaac and that endless road. Things are about to get even wilder. The air in the car was thick, sour, with a metallic sting that burned his throat. The sky was gone, just a heavy black pressing against the windows, making the car feel like a trap. Streetlights flickered in perfect rhythm, each one a clone of the last, their weak light throwing shadows that twisted into shapes. Faces, hands, regrets he'd buried deep. The trees weren't trees anymore. Their branches coiled into patterns that screamed his nightmares, repeating forever like the road was laughing at him with its sameness. This wasn't driving, it was falling, a dive into the parts of himself he'd chained shut. She was everywhere. One second she was in the back seat, grey coat folded, clutching that crumpled paper with his name scrawled on it. The next, she stood in the road, still as death, her outline sharp against the headlights. Then she was beside him, a cold weight that made his skin crawl. He couldn't look at her, didn't want those eyes slicing him open, but he felt her, a silent order to remember, to own up. "Who the hell are you?" he croaked, voice swallowed by the engine's drone. No answer, just the air turning colder, the stench of guilt sharper. She wasn't just a rider, she was a piece of him, a splinter from a past he'd tried to burn. The other car stayed ahead, its driver, his double, steering with a calm Isaac couldn't fake. Every glance at those taillights showed his own face, but wrong, colder, harder, a him that carried the truth without buckling. It pissed him off, scared him, seeing himself so close yet so far, a ghost of the man he might have been if he hadn't fucked up years ago. That fuck up, it was clawing up now, not a whisper, but a tidal wave, raw and ugly, a night when he'd turned his back, left someone who trusted him to drown in his mess. He'd told himself it was survival, no choice, but the road wasn't buying it. Never had. The radio hissed, his voice cutting through. "You're getting closer, Isaac." No more hiding. Soft, almost kind, but it hit like a brick. Closer to what? Truth? Hell? He slammed the dashboard, killing the sound, but the words stuck, poison in his veins. He wasn't hiding. He'd built a life, a routine, a cage for the past. But the road was ripping it open, mile by mile, making him see the blood on his hands, real or not. The asphalt shimmered, liquid-like, rippling under the tires as if it breathed. Streetlights pulsed faster, their flicker a strobe that screwed with his head. The trees blurred into one shape, branches twisting into faces, not just hers, but others, people he'd let down, promises he'd snapped. The other car slowed, keeping him close, and he caught the driver's eyes in the mirror. His eyes, but heavy with something like pity. "What do you want?" Isaac yelled, voice breaking, but the road ate his words, uncaring. She was back in the car, passenger seat now, staring out the window. The paper was gone, but her presence was a fist around his lungs. He risked a glance, just a flash, and saw her hair shift, showing the edge of a face he knew too well. Not just a ghost, but her, the one he'd betrayed, the one he'd left behind. His gut twisted, and he snapped his eyes to the road, but her face burned in his brain. "I didn't mean it," he muttered, barely a sound. "I didn't mean for it to go that way." Weak words, useless, but all he had. The other car swerved, cutting him off, forcing him to jerk the wheel. Tires screamed, the car fishtailing. And for a second, he thought he'd crash. But the road held him, kept him moving like it wasn't done playing with him. The double sped up, then slowed, toying with him, a predator circling. Isaac's pulse pounded, breaths short, mind a mess of fear and guilt. Her voice came again, soft, unyielding. "Keep going. To where? To what?" The road wasn't taking him anywhere. It was tearing him apart, layer by layer, until only the truth was left. A low rumble broke the quiet, like thunder from nowhere. The ground shook, the asphalt rippling harder, and the streetlights blinked. Out, plunging everything into a deeper dark. Only the headlights cut through, his and the other cars, slicing the void. The trees were gone, the sky a blank nothing, and the road felt tighter, like it was squeezing him towards something inevitable. She was in the road again, arms outstretched, coat flapping in a wind he couldn't feel. He hit the brakes, but the car just slowed, gliding toward her, like the road was driving now. "Tell me what you want," he roared, throat raw, but she didn't budge, didn't speak. Her shape filled the windshield, and for a split second her face was clear, eyes wide with pain, betrayal, a question he'd dodged for years. Then she vanished, and the car surged forward, engine snarling. The other car was beside him again, its driver staring with an intensity that made Isaac's skin crawl. "You know," the radio crackled, his voice low and sure, "you've always known." The memories hit like a flood, no longer pieces, but a full-on assault. That night, years ago, when he'd chosen himself over her, her voice begging, his call cold and final. The moment he walked away, leaving her to face the fallout alone, he'd told himself it wasn't on him, that he had no choice. But the road was shredding that lie. It showed him every detail, her fear, his betrayal, the life he'd wrecked. Even if it wasn't with a bullet. His hands shook, eyes stinging with tears he didn't want. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the road didn't give a damn about sorry. It wanted blood. The other car pulled ahead, taillights flaring, and something new loomed in the distance, a shape vague at first, but sharpening with every mile. Not a town, not a safe haven. Something else, something the road had been dragging him toward all along, equal parts promise and threat. His heart slammed throat tight as her presence filled the car again, not a body but a force, a whisper in his ear. "Keep going," she said, voice edged with something new, urgency or maybe warning. The road shifted, the asphalt smoothing out, almost glass-like, reflecting the headlights like a star field. Streetlights were gone, trees a memory, and the world was just him, the other car, and that shape ahead. The double slowed, daring him to catch up, to see what waited. Isaac's hands trembled, his mind screaming to turn back, to find any way out. But the road didn't do outs. It was a one-way trip, and it was hauling him toward the truth he'd dodged forever. The radio hissed again, his voice softer, almost a plea. MediaWiki.org. "You're almost there, Isaac. Don't stop now." He didn't want to keep going, didn't want to face whatever was waiting, but her command was steel, the road's grip absolute. The shape in the distance grew clearer. Not a building, not a gate, but a threshold, a jagged tear in the dark leading somewhere the road couldn't touch. The other car stopped just shy of it, its driver stepping out, facing him. It was him, always him, but now his double held something. A mirror, small and glinting, showing Isaac's own scared, shitless face. Her voice whispered, close, like she was right behind him. "Keep going!" Isaac's breath hitched, foot hovering. Over the gas, the threshold loomed, the mirror gleamed, and the road held its breath, waiting for him to decide. To drive, to face it, to see what lay beyond his guilt. The night closed in, the truth tighter, and Isaac drove, not because he wanted to, but because the road gave him no choice. The road thrummed beneath Isaac's tires, a living, breathing beast that pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the frantic hammering of his heart. The dashboard clock, eternally frozen at 3:08, was a silent taunt, a cruel reminder that time had abandoned him to this relentless, unending loop. His hands, drenched in cold sweat, clung to the steering wheel with a desperation that turned his. Knuckles bone white under the weak flickering glow of the dashboard lights. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to stop, to slam on the brakes, to tear open the door and run screaming into the suffocating dark. But her voice, "Keep going," was a jagged hook embedded deep in his mind, pulling him forward, forcing him to obey the endless stretch of blacktop that seemed to know every dark corner of his soul better than he ever could. The other car, his car, driven by that shadow version of himself, led the way, its taillights glowing like twin embers in the oppressive night, beckoning him deeper into a darkness that refused to relent. The air inside the car was thick, almost viscous, heavy with a sharp metallic tang that stung his throat and coated his tongue with the bitter taste of dread. The sky was no longer a sky. It was a void, a suffocating expanse of black that pressed against the windows, turning the car into a claustrophobic prison, a metal coffin hurtling through a nightmare. The streetlights, those cursed flickering sentinels, blinked in perfect, maddening rhythm, each one an exact replica of the last, their sickly yellow glow casting long, distorted shadows that writhed across the asphalt like living things. The shadows twisted into shapes that clawed at his sanity, faces half-remembered, hands reaching out, moments he'd spent years shoving into the deepest pits of his mind. The trees lining the road were no longer mere vegetation, their gnarled branches coiled into patterns that mirrored the nightmares he'd tried to outrun, their silhouettes repeating in an endless, hypnotic cycle, as if the road itself was mocking him with its unrelenting sameness. This wasn't a drive anymore, not a journey with a beginning or an end. It was a descent, a slow, deliberate plunge into the parts of himself he'd locked away, sealed behind walls of denial and self-deception. She was everywhere, inescapable, a specter woven into the fabric of the night. One moment she sat in the back seat, her grey coat folded neatly over her lap, the crumpled piece of paper with his name, scrawled in that jagged, accusing script, clutched tightly in her pale hands. The next, she stood in the middle of the road motionless, her silhouette sharp and unyielding against the blinding glare of the headlights, a statue carved from the dark itself. Then she was beside him, in the passenger seat, her presence a cold, heavy weight that pressed against his ribs, making every breath feel like a theft. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, didn't dare meet those eyes that he knew would slice through him like glass, peeling back the lies he'd told himself to survive. But he felt her, a silent, unrelenting demand to remember, to confess, to drag the truth kicking and screaming into the light. "Who the hell are you?" he rasped, his voice barely audible over the low, incessant drone of the engine, swallowed by the oppressive silence that filled the car. She didn't answer. She never did, but the air grew colder, the scent of guilt and regret sharpening until it was almost a physical thing, a blade pressed against his throat. She wasn't just a passenger, not just a ghost. She was a fragment of him, a splinter of a past he'd tried to erase, a wound that had never stopped bleeding. The other car stayed ahead, its driver, his doppelganger, that shadowed, sharper version of himself, steering with a calm, infuriating certainty that Isaac could only envy. Every glance at those taillights, glowing like the eyes of some predatory beast, showed him his own face, but altered, colder, harder, a version of Isaac that carried the weight of truth without flinching, without breaking. It was maddening, terrifying, to see himself so close yet so impossibly distant, a living reminder of the man he might have been if he hadn't made that choice. That one unforgivable decision years ago. That choice. It was no longer a whisper, no longer a vague shadow lurking at the edges of his consciousness. It was a tidal wave, a flood of memory crashing over him, vivid and merciless. A night, years ago, when he'd stood at a crossroads, not of asphalt but of morality, and chosen himself. He'd turned his back, walked away, left someone who trusted him, who needed him to face the consequences of his cowardice alone. He told himself it was survival, that he had no other option, that anyone would have done the same. But the road didn't buy his excuses. It never had. It was a judge, a jury, an executioner, and it was here to make him pay. The radio crackled. to life, unprompted, his own voice slicing through the static like a knife. "You're getting closer, Isaac. No more hiding." The words were soft, almost gentle, but they landed like a sledgehammer, cracking the fragile shell of his denial. Closer to what? The truth? Redemption? Or something far worse, something that waited in the dark with bared teeth? He slammed his fist against the dashboard, silencing the radio, but the words lingered, sinking into him like poison, spreading through his veins. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't. He'd built a life, a routine, a fragile scaffolding to keep the past at bay. He'd driven these empty roads, taken these late-night fares, kept moving to outrun the memories, but the road was tearing it all down, mile by merciless mile, forcing him to see the blood on his hands. Whether it was literal or not, it stained him just the same. The asphalt beneath the tires shimmered, almost liquid, rippling like a dark river, carrying him towards some inevitable fate. The streetlights pulsed faster, their flicker turning into a disorienting strobe that made his head pound, his vision blur. The trees blurred into a single grotesque shape, their branches twisting into faces, not just hers, but others. A parade of people he'd let down, promises he'd broken, lives he'd brushed against and scarred. The other car slowed, keeping him tethered to its orbit, and he caught a glimpse of the driver's eyes in the side mirror. His eyes, but heavy with a pity that made his stomach churn. "What do you want from me?" Isaac shouted, his voice raw, cracking under the weight of his fear. But the road swallowed his words, indifferent, unyielding. She was back in the car, sitting in the passenger seat now, her head turned toward the window, her silhouette rigid, unyielding. The crumpled paper was gone, but her presence was a vice around his chest, squeezing until he could barely breathe. He risked a glance, just a fleeting moment, and saw her hair shift, revealing the edge of a face he knew too well. Not just a ghost, but her, the one he'd betrayed, the one whose trust he'd shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. His stomach twisted, a sick lurch, and he snapped his eyes back to the road, but her face was burned into his mind, her eyes wide, with pain, with betrayal, with a question he'd never had the courage to answer. "I didn't mean it," he muttered, the words barely a breath, lost in the hum of the engine. "I didn't mean for it to go that way." They were weak, pathetic, a flimsy shield against the truth, but they were all he had, all he could muster in the face of her silent accusation. The other car swerved suddenly, cutting in front of him, forcing him to jerk the wheel hard to the left. The tires screeched, the car fishtailing wildly, and for a heart-stopping moment he thought he'd lose control, that he'd crash into the dark and be done with it. But the road held him, kept him moving, as if it wasn't finished with its game. The doppelganger sped up, then slowed, toying with him, a predator circling its wounded prey. Isaac's pulse pounded in his temples, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps, his mind a chaotic storm of fear, guilt, and desperation. Her voice came again, soft but relentless, cutting through the noise in his head. "Keep going." To where? To what? The road wasn't leading him to a destination. It was dismantling him layer by layer, stripping away the lies until only the raw, bleeding truth remained. A low, ominous rumble broke the silence, like thunder rolling in from a storm that didn't exist. The ground trembled, the asphalt rippling more violently now, sending shudders through the car that made his teeth rattle. The streetlights flickered out one by one, plunging the world into a deeper, more suffocating dark, until only the headlights remained, his and the other cars, slicing through the void like twin blades. The trees were gone, erased from existence, and the sky was a blank, featureless nothing, a canvas of black that seemed to pulse with his own heartbeat. The road felt narrower, constricting, like it was funneling him towards something inescapable, something that loomed just beyond his sight. She was in the road again, standing with her arms outstretched, her grey coat flapping in a wind that didn't touch him. He slammed on the brakes, his foot jamming the pedal to the floor, but the car didn't stop. It slowed, gliding toward her with a sickening inevitability, as if the road itself was in control, steering him to his fate. "Tell me what you want," he roared, his throat raw, his voice echoing in the empty cabin. But she didn't move, didn't speak. Her silhouette filled the windshield, growing larger, more imposing, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, her face was clear, eyes wide with pain, with betrayal. with a question that had haunted him for years. Why? Then she was gone, vanishing like smoke, and the car surged forward, the engine snarling back to life with a ferocity that made his heart skip. The other car was beside him again, matching his speed, its driver staring at him with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. "You know," the radio crackled, his own voice low and deliberate, cutting through the chaos. "You've always known." The words were a gut punch, a reminder that he couldn't outrun the truth, no matter how fast he drove, no matter how far he went. The memories came harder now, no longer fragments, but a vivid, unrelenting assault. A film reel of his worst moments playing on loop. That night, years ago, when he'd made the choice that broke everything. Her voice trembling, pleading for him to stay, to help, to be the man she thought he was. His decision, cold, calculated, final. The moment he turned his back, walking away, leaving her to face the fallout alone, a fallout that had destroyed her, even if he hadn't held the weapon himself. He told himself it wasn't his fault, that he'd had no choice, that survival demanded sacrifice. But the road was tearing that lie apart, shredding it with every mile, showing him every detail, her fear, her pain, the moment, her trust. In him shattered, the life he'd stolen with his cowardice. His hands shook, his vision blurring with tears he didn't want to shed, tears he didn't deserve to shed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words choking him, but the road didn't care about apologies. It wasn't here for his remorse. It wanted something more, something deeper. It wanted him to face it, to own it, to carry the weight of what he'd done without flinching. The other car pulled ahead again, its taillights flaring like a warning, and something new appeared in the distance, a shape indistinct at first, shrouded in the dark, but growing clearer, more defined with every mile. It wasn't a town, not a safe haven, not anything he could name. It was something else, something the road had been dragging him toward from the moment he'd accepted her ride, something that felt like both a promise and a threat, a reckoning dressed in shadows. His heart slammed against his ribs, his throat, so tight he could barely breathe as her presence filled the car again. Not as a figure, but as a force, a whisper that seemed to come from inside his own skull. "Keep going," she said, her voice laced with an urgency that sent ice through his veins, a warning that whatever lay ahead was no longer optional. The road was changing, the asphalt smoothing out, almost glassy, reflecting the headlights, in a way that made it look like he was driving across a starless sky. The streetlights were gone, the trees a fading memory, and the world had shrunk to just him, the other car, and that shape looming in the distance, its edges sharpening, its presence growing heavier with every second. The doppelganger slowed as if daring him to catch up, to peer into the abyss that waited. Isaac's hands trembled, his mind a screaming chorus of panic, begging him to turn back, to find any way out. But the road didn't offer escapes. It was a one-way path, a tunnel with no reverse, and it was hauling him toward the truth he'd spent a lifetime dodging. The radio hissed again, his voice softer now, almost a plea, but laced with a certainty that made his blood run cold. "You're almost there, Isaac. Don't stop now." He didn't want to keep going, didn't want to face whatever was waiting, but her command was iron, the road's grip unbreakable, and the shape ahead was no longer a vague outline. It was solid, real, a threshold carved into the dark, a jagged doorway that pulsed with a light that wasn't light, a glow that felt like it could see him, know him, judge him. The other car stopped just before it, its driver stepping out, standing. In the road facing him, it was him, always him. But now his double held something, a mirror, small and glinting, its surface reflecting Isaac's own terrified face, his eyes wide with fear, with guilt, with the weight of a past he couldn't outrun. Her voice whispered again, closer now, like she was leaning over his shoulder, her breath cold against his ear. "Keep going." Isaac's breath hitched, his foot hovering over the gas, his entire body trembling with the urge to flee, to fight, to do anything but drive toward that threshold. The mirror gleamed, the doorway pulsed, and the road held its breath, waiting for him to choose, to drive, to face it, to step into the truth he'd buried. The night pressed in, the guilt pressed harder, and Isaac drove, not because he wanted to, but because the road left him no other path, pulling him toward the edge of something vast, something final, something that would either break him or make. him whole. The threshold loomed ahead, a jagged tear in the fabric of the night, its edges pulsing with a sickly, unnatural light that seemed to hum with a life of its own. Isaac's foot trembled over the gas pedal, his breath shallow, ragged, as the road, a relentless, sentient force, urged him forward. The dashboard clock, still locked at 3:08, was a silent judge, its unchanging face a reminder that he was trapped in a moment that refused to release him. His hands, clammy and unsteady, gripped the wheel, the leather creaking under his fingers as he fought the primal urge to swerve, to defy the path that seemed to have chosen him. The other car, his car, stood motionless just shy of the threshold. Its driver, his doppelganger, waiting, the small, glinting mirror in his hand, reflecting Isaac's own terrified eyes. A window into the guilt he couldn't escape. Her voice, that inescapable whisper, slithered through his mind again. Keep going, not a suggestion, but a decree, laced with a chilling certainty that whatever lay beyond that doorway was his to face, whether he wanted it or not. The road itself seemed to breathe now, its surface no longer merely asphalt, but a shimmering, glassy expanse that reflected not just the headlights, but fragments of his own thoughts, flashes of regret, guilt, and the face of the woman he'd betrayed. The air inside the car grew denser, charged with an electric buzz that made his skin prickle, as if the very atmosphere was alive, watching, judging. The world beyond the windshield had collapsed into a tunnel, the threshold at its end, the only point of focus. Its light now shifting, swirling with colors that didn't belong, blues that burned, reds that whispered, greens that screamed. The woman's presence was no longer confined to a single spot. She was the air, the hum, the weight pressing against his chest, her essence woven into the very fabric of this nightmare. He could still see her in his mind's eye, not just the gray-coated figure, but her, the one from years ago, her eyes pleading, her voice breaking as he turned away, leaving her to a fate he'd convinced himself wasn't his fault. The doppelganger stood unmoving, a sentinel at the edge of the threshold, the mirror in his hand no longer just a reflection, but a portal, its surface rippling with images that weren't Isaac's face anymore. They were scenes, moments, her standing in a rain-soaked alley, her hands outstretched, her mouth forming words he'd refused to hear, a door slamming shut, his own footsteps echoing as he fled, a newspaper headline, blurred but damning, its ink bleeding into the dark. Isaac's stomach churned, his throat tightening as the mirror showed him not just what he'd done, but what he'd refused to see, the ripple effects, the lives fractured by his choice, the weight of a single moment that had defined him ever since. "You can't turn back," the radio hissed, his own voice, but softer now, almost mournful, as if the other Isaac pitied him, as if he knew what lay ahead and wished he didn't. The car inched forward, not by Isaac's will, but by the road's insistence, the engine growling low, a beast eager to deliver him to his reckoning. The threshold was closer now, its light spilling onto the hood, casting strange, shifting patterns that looked like runes, like words in a language he couldn't read but felt in his bones. The hum grew louder, a chorus of voices, not just hers, but others, a cacophony of accusations, regrets, and pleas, all blending into a sound that was both deafening and intimate, like it was coming from inside. His skull, he wanted to scream, to drown it out, but his voice was gone, stolen by the weight of what he was approaching. The doppelganger took a step toward the threshold, his silhouette framed against the pulsing light, and for the first time, he turned fully to face Isaac, his expression no longer cold or certain, but raw, vulnerable, a mirror of the fear Isaac felt but refused to admit. The mirror in the doppelganger's hand flared, its light blinding for a moment, and when Isaac's vision cleared, he saw something new within it. Not a memory, but a vision, a possibility. It was him, older, weathered, standing in a place that wasn't the road, a place with soft light, with people who looked at him not with judgment, but with something like trust. But the vision flickered, replaced by another, him, alone, hunched. In the dark room, the weight of his guilt a physical thing crushing him. The mirror was showing him choices, paths, the man he could become if he faced the truth, or the husk he'd be if he kept running. His hands shook, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. And he realized the threshold wasn't just a doorway, it was a judgment, a moment where he'd have to decide who he was, who he'd be. The road seemed to tighten around him, the glassy surface now warm under the tires, as if it were alive, urging him closer to the light. The voices in the hum grew clearer, her voice rising above the rest, not accusing, but imploring, a plea that cut deeper than any scream. "You have to see it," she whispered, and he knew she didn't mean the threshold, didn't mean the light. She meant himself, the truth of what he'd done, the man he'd become in the shadow of that choice. The doppelganger raised the mirror higher, its light now sinking with the threshold's pulse, and Isaac felt a pull, not just from the road, but from within, a need to know, to understand, to face whatever waited on the other side. The car was almost at the threshold now, the light so bright it burned his eyes. But he couldn't look away. The patterns on the hood shifted faster, forming shapes that looked like her face, then his, then hers again, a cycle of guilt and memory that refused to let him go. The doppelganger stepped to the side, gesturing toward the doorway, his eyes, Isaac's, eyes filled with a strange mix of sorrow and hope. The hum was a roar now, the voices a symphony, and Isaac's hands moved on their own, easing the car forward, the engine's growl a low, steady promise of what was to come. He didn't want to go, didn't want to face it, but the road had, never cared about what he wanted. It was a force, a will, and it was delivering him to the edge of something vast, something that could shatter him or set him free. The threshold was inches away, its light now a wall, a barrier that felt alive, sentient, waiting for him to cross. The mirror in the doppelganger's hand glowed brighter, showing one final image, her, not as she'd been in that moment of betrayal, but as she might have been, smiling whole, a life that could have been if he'd chosen differently. The image broke something in him, a sob tearing from his throat, but the road didn't pause, didn't relent. Her voice came again, clear, urgent, a command that left no room for doubt. "Keep going." Isaac's foot pressed the gas, the car lurching forward, the light swallowing him whole, and the world dissolved into a blinding endless now, a moment where everything, his past, his guilt, his truth, waited just beyond the edge. The threshold pulsed before Isaac, a jagged wound in the night, its sickly light throbbing with a hunger that seemed to call his name. The road, now a glassy, star-flecked expanse, urged him forward, its will undeniable, a sentient force that had stripped him bare over countless miles. The dashboard clock, still frozen at 3:08, was a silent executioner, marking the moment he'd been trapped in this loop of guilt and reckoning. His hands, trembling and slick with sweat, clung to the steering wheel, the leather groaning under his grip as he fought the pull of the doorway ahead. The other car, his car, stood just beyond the threshold, its driver, his doppelganger, motionless, the small, glinting mirror in his hand reflecting Isaac's haunted eyes, a cruel window into the truth he could no longer deny. Her voice, that relentless whisper, echoed in his skull. "Keep going." A final command, heavy with the weight of inevitability, promising no escape from what waited on the other side. The air in the car was electric, charged with a buzzing intensity that made his skin crawl, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The threshold's light swirled with unnatural hues, blues that seared, reds that whispered of blood, greens that screamed of decay, casting shifting patterns across the hood, runes that seemed to writhe like living things. She was no longer a single presence, but a force, woven into the hum that filled the car, the road, the night itself. Her essence was everywhere, in the air, in the light, in the weight crushing his chest, demanding he face the truth of what he'd done. The doppelganger stood at the edge of the threshold, his silhouette framed against the pulsing glow, the mirror now a beacon, its surface rippling with images of her final moments. Her pleading eyes, her trembling hands, the instant Isaac had turned away, leaving her to a fate he'd convinced himself wasn't his to bear. The mirror flared, showing not just memories but consequences. her life unraveling in the wake of his betrayal, the pain that rippled outward, touching others he'd never known. A chain of suffering that began with his choice. Isaac's throat tightened, his heart pounding so fiercely it felt like it might tear free. The hum grew deafening, a chorus of voices, hers, his, and countless others, blending into a wail that clawed at his sanity. "You can't undo it," the radio hissed, his own voice raw with a grief he'd never allowed himself to feel. "But you have to see." The doppelganger raised the mirror higher, its light merging with the threshold's glow, and Isaac saw one last vision, her face, not as she'd been in life, but as she was now, hollow, broken, a ghost forged by his cowardice, her eyes empty of forgiveness. The car crept closer to the threshold, driven not by Isaac's will, but by the road's insatiable hunger. The engine growled, a primal sound that seemed to echo the roar in his mind. The light was blinding now, spilling into the cabin, illuminating every crack in his resolve, every lie he'd told himself to keep going. The patterns on the hood twisted into her name, over and over, a litany of guilt that burned into his retinas. He wanted to stop, to throw the car into reverse, to flee back into the dark, but the road was a one-way current, and he was caught in its pull. The doppelganger stepped aside, his expression no longer pitying but resigned, as if he knew the end and could do nothing to change it. The mirror in his hand pulsed, showing Isaac one final truth, himself, not as he was now, but as he'd be if he crossed the threshold. A man consumed, a shell hollowed out by the weight of his sins. "You have to see," her voice whispered, clear and final, not from the air but from within him, a part of him now, inseparable. The threshold was inches away, its light a wall that seemed to breathe, to hunger, to demand. Isaac's hands shook, his foot pressing the gas despite every instinct screaming to stop. The car lurched forward, the light swallowing him whole, and for a moment there was nothing, no sound, no road, no self, just a blinding, endless void where every moment of his life played at once. He saw her again, not as a ghost, but as she'd been, alive, trusting, her smile a knife in his heart. He saw the night he'd chosen himself, the moment he'd walked away, the weight of that choice crashing over him like a wave. He saw the lives he'd broken, the futures he'd stolen, the man he'd become in the shadow of that betrayal. The void shattered, and Isaac was no longer in the car. He stood on a barren plain, the road gone, the threshold behind him now a closed, unyielding gate. The mirror lay at his feet, its surface cracked, reflecting nothing but the grey, lifeless sky above. The doppelganger was gone. The car was gone, and she was there, standing before him, her grey coat tattered, her face no longer hidden. It was her, the one he'd failed, her eyes empty, her voice a hollow echo. "You saw," she said, and the words were a verdict, a sentence. The ground beneath him cracked, splitting wide, and he felt himself falling, not into darkness, but into memory, into the moment he'd made his choice, forced to relive it again and again. Each cycle was sharper, more vivid, her pain more real, his guilt heavier. There was no escape, no road to drive, no way to outrun it. The plane became a prison, the mirror's shards embedding themselves in his skin, each one a fragment of truth he could never unsee. He screamed, but no sound came, his voice stolen by the weight of what he'd done. She watched, unblinking, as he fell apart, piece by piece, his identity unraveling until there was nothing left but the raw, bleeding core of his regret. The threshold had not been a doorway to redemption, nor to judgment. It was a trap, a place where he'd be forced to live with himself forever, with no reprieve, no forgiveness, no end. Isaac's final thought, as the ground swallowed him whole, was her name, spoken in a whisper that no one would ever hear. The road had won, as it always would, and somewhere in the dark, the clock ticked to 3:09, then stopped, leaving only silence where a man had once been. Isaac's night on that endless road left us with a shiver, his past riding shotgun, refusing to let go. What is it about these loops that trap us, replaying our worst moments? There's another tale that pulls you into that same eerie grip. A woman, a locked room, and a clock that won't tick forward. It's got that same haunting pull, waiting to unravel its secrets. Click to step into her nightmare and see what's locked inside.